Michael, a middle-aged man, is the picture of success. Owner of a network of companies that made him a millionaire, he lives in an imposing mansion with his wife Clara and their two young children Julia and Lucas. Michael's life is surrounded by luxury and comfort. Every detail of his home reflects the power and wealth he has accumulated over the years. However, Michael is not just a businessman. He is meticulous, demanding, and above all, determined to ensure that his family has only the best of everything. But behind this facade of perfection lies a pain that Michael keeps locked away: the abandonment by his mother, Margaret, when he was still a child. This event shaped who he became: a tough, pragmatic man who avoids revisiting the wounds of the past at all costs. Whenever someone mentions his mother, his expression hardens, and he changes the subject, burying any emotion that might arise. However, this wound, as deep as it is, doesn't show in his daily life. Michael is a dedicated father, although distant at times. He is the provider, the one who ensures his family never lacks anything, but he rarely shows affection through gestures or words. His children, though they love him, sense his lack of warmth, something Clara tries to make up for with her own tenderness and constant presence. Michael's world is controlled and predictable, just the way he likes it. But behind every forced smile in business meetings and every night spent alone in his office, there is a restlessness, a shadow he has never been able to dispel. This is the man who has conquered everything, but who still carries a scar within that success could not heal. Michael is in his office when the phone rings, interrupting his focus on business. The voice on the other end is deep and direct. His mother, Margaret, is hospitalized in critical condition and has asked to see him. The news hits him like a punch to the stomach. For years, he had buried any thoughts of her, convinced he would never have to deal with the ghost of his past again. Michael's first reaction is denial. He doesn't want to see her. The hurt and resentment he has nurtured throughout his life resurface with full force, and the idea of forgiving her seems absurd. He thinks about refusing, about continuing his life as if nothing had happened. However, something inside him prevents him from simply hanging up the phone. The memories of his difficult childhood, the pain of abandonment, all resurface in a way he cannot ignore. Michael spends the day wrestling with this new reality. At home, he doesn't mention the call to Clara, but she notices something is bothering him. The firm and controlled man she knows seems shaken, distant. During dinner, Michael barely touches his food, lost in thought, reliving every moment of the pain caused by his mother's abandonment. Finally, after hours of indecision, Michael decides to go to the hospital. Not out of pity, but because of an internal need to confront the past. He needs to understand why his mother abandoned him, even if it means reopening old wounds. When he arrives at the hospital, the cold, impersonal environment makes his heart race. Michael walks toward the room where his mother is hospitalized, his steps heavy as if each one requires enormous effort. As he enters, he sees her, an elderly, fragile woman with a face marked by time and suffering. The sight of her shocks Michael, who only remembered her as the strong young woman who left him behind. Margaret looks at him with tear-filled, guilty eyes. The emotion is palpable, but Michael keeps his expression cold. The silence between them is thick, laden with years of pain and unanswered questions. Still conflicted, Michael watches his mother as she tries to whisper something, her voice weak, almost inaudible. At that moment, Michael realizes that despite all the anger and hurt he feels, there is a part of him that still wants to understand, perhaps even forgive. But for him, that seems like a monumental challenge, a battle he's unsure he's ready to face. The reunion is just the beginning of an internal confrontation Michael never imagined he would have to face. Michael faces Margaret, feeling a mix of emotions he thought he had buried forever. The woman before him, so fragile and different from the figure he remembered, begins to speak, her voice trembling and filled with regret. She apologizes for what she did, for the abandonment, for leaving her son to fend for himself. Every word feels like a blow, a knife twisting in the wounds that never healed. Michael listens in silence, but his eyes remain hard, incapable of showing any sign of compassion. He coldly asks what made her come back after so many years. Why now? Why just when he had finally achieved everything he wanted in life? Margaret, with tears in her eyes, begins to reveal the truth that Michael never expected to hear. She explains that she didn't abandon him out of a lack of love, but because she was being threatened by his father, a violent and controlling man who swore to destroy her life and Michael's if she stayed. With no other way out, Margaret was forced to flee to protect her son, believing that this was the only way to ensure his safety. Margaret's words are like an earthquake in Michael's mind. He had always believed she had abandoned him out of selfishness, out of indifference. But now, the truth is presented in a painful and complex way, challenging all his beliefs and resentments. Michael, still processing the revelations, abruptly stands and begins pacing the room. He can't bring himself to look at Margaret. He doesn't know how to react. The anger he had felt for so many years begins to transform into something he doesn't recognize. Confusion, doubt, perhaps even compassion. Seeing the internal turmoil in her son, Margaret continues to speak, trying to explain every detail, every difficult decision she made. She talks about the years she spent hiding, always in fear that Michael's father would find her, and how she tried, unsuccessfully, to return to him many times. But fear and guilt always stopped her from taking the final step. Michael finally stops and looks at his mother, his eyes still full of pain but now with something more. He realizes that, no matter how hard he tries, he can no longer hate her with the same intensity. The truth is far more complex than he had imagined, and it disarms him. He leaves the room without saying a word, unable to deal with the whirlwind of emotions consuming him. Michael walks down the hospital corridors, trying to find some clarity amid the chaos now ruling his mind. The image of his mother, the woman he had hated for so long, is now a different shadow, filled with nuances he never wanted to see. Michael knows there is still much to process, much to confront within himself. But one thing is clear. His life, so carefully built on a foundation of control and success, has just been shaken in a way he could never have predicted. Michael returns home that night, but it feels like he's somewhere else. Clara immediately notices the change. The confident man, always with the right answers, now seems lost, carrying an invisible weight that he doesn't know how to set down. Sitting in the living room, Michael mentally reviews every word his mother said, every detail of a story he could never have imagined. Clara quietly approaches and sits next to him. She knows her husband well, knows he won't talk about what's happening unless pressed. But this time the silence between them is different, deeper. "Michael, what's going on?" she asks, her voice gentle but firm. He hesitates for a moment, but he knows he can't avoid it anymore. The weight of the truth is too heavy to bear alone. He tells Clara everything, from the unexpected phone call to Margaret's revelations at the hospital. As he speaks, his voice wavers between anger and sadness. Clara listens closely, her eyes reflecting the pain he feels. When he finishes, the silence that follows is thick, heavy with the weight of years of hurt and a new understanding. Clara takes Michael's hand, squeezing it tightly. "Michael, maybe it's time to let this pain go. To find a way to move forward, for yourself and for our children." Her words echo in Michael's mind. He knows Clara is right, but forgiveness is not something he can easily give. He spent his whole life building an emotional wall to protect himself, and now tearing it down seems impossible. The next day, Michael seeks advice from Raymond, his mentor and old friend. Raymond, a wise man of few words, listens to Michael's story without interrupting. When Michael finishes, Raymond remains silent for a long moment before speaking. "Michael, forgiveness is not for the weak. It's not about forgetting what happened, but about finding peace within yourself. If you continue to carry this resentment, it will consume you as it already is. Your mother made mistakes, no doubt, but she has paid a heavy price for them. Now, it's up to you to decide whether you'll remain trapped by the past or set yourself free." Those words stay with Michael as he returns home. He thinks about his children, about how he wants to be a different father than his mother was to him. He doesn't want them to grow up with a bitter father, trapped by the pains of the past. In the days that follow, Michael finds himself in an even greater internal conflict. He knows that forgiveness isn't simple, it's not something that can be granted overnight. But at the same time, he realizes that continuing to harbor hatred for his mother isn't bringing him any peace, only more pain. Clara, always by his side, supports him through every moment. She understands that this is a battle Michael must face alone, but she's there to hold his hand when he needs it. Meanwhile, Margaret's health continues to deteriorate. The image of her in the hospital, so fragile and remorseful, doesn't leave Michael's mind. He begins to consider the possibility of visiting her again, but the fear of reliving the pain paralyzes him. He spends sleepless nights reflecting on what Raymond said, on what Clara tries to show him with her kindness and patience. Michael knows he needs to make a decision that could change not only his relationship with his mother, but also the course of his own life. That night, Michael makes the decision he had been postponing since reuniting with his mother. He returns to the hospital, this time with a different purpose. Upon entering the room, he notices that Margaret's condition has worsened. She is pale, with shallow breathing, but her eyes light up when she sees him. Michael sits beside her, silently observing the woman who caused him so much pain, but who, in some way, also gave him the strength to become who he is. He takes Margaret's hand, feeling for the first time a surge of compassion, a genuine desire to understand what she went through. The frailty of her hand contrasts with the intensity of the emotions consuming him. Margaret, her voice faltering, whispers that she doesn't have much time left and that what she desires most is her son's forgiveness. She speaks of the remorse that has haunted her for all these years, of the sleepless nights filled with nightmares about the son she never got to watch grow up. Michael listens in silence, his heart heavy with the dilemma between the accumulated anger and the empathy beginning to stir. He finally speaks, his voice full of restrained emotion. "Mom, I spent my whole life hating you. I thought that if I hated you enough, the pain of your abandonment would lessen. But it didn't. It only grew, turning me into someone bitter and distant." He pauses, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I don't know if I can completely forgive you. But at the same time, I don't want to carry this burden anymore. Maybe it's time to try." Margaret smiles faintly, tears streaming down her face. "That's all I ever needed to hear, my son. The simple fact that you're here, trying, it's more than I ever imagined receiving." They sit like that for a few minutes, in a silence that feels almost healing. Michael feels, for the first time, a sense of relief, as if part of the pain is beginning to dissolve. But then, something unexpected happens. Margaret, with a weak voice, confesses that there is something else Michael needs to know. Something she never had the courage to tell him, but now feels she must reveal before it's too late. Michael, intrigued and slightly alarmed, holds her hand more firmly, encouraging her to continue. Margaret reveals that Michael has a younger brother, born from a relationship she had after fleeing the abusive home. She never had the chance to tell Michael, fearing that he would hate her even more. The brother, now an adult, was raised in difficult circumstances, without the luxury or opportunities that Michael had. He lives in a distant city, struggling to survive. The revelation shocks Michael. He had always believed that his life, though marked by his mother's absence, was complete in its own way. Now he is confronted with the reality that his family is larger and more complex than he ever imagined. He has a brother he never knew, someone who likely shares the same pain and confusion he felt for so many years. Before Michael can fully process this information, Margaret, with her last bit of strength, holds his hand with a pleading look. "Find him, Michael. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't let him live without knowing that there's someone in the world who cares about him." With those words, Margaret closes her eyes for the last time, leaving Michael alone with the weight of a new responsibility and a truth he could never have foreseen. He feels a sharp pain realizing his mother is gone, but also a growing determination to fulfill her final wish. In the days that follow, Michael reflects deeply on what he has learned. He realizes that his life was built on a foundation of success and control, but in the end, what truly matters are the human connections he neglected. The search for his brother, a stranger who shares his blood, becomes a new mission, something he knows he must do not only for his mother but for himself. Michael begins planning his journey to find his brother, feeling that, in doing so, he will finally close the cycle of pain and resentment that has governed his life for so long. He understands that true forgiveness is not just a gift for the person who receives it, but a release for the one who grants it. The end of the story is not what Michael expected. There is no simple reconciliation or conventional happy ending. Instead, there is an open path, full of uncertainties, but also possibilities for healing and redemption. Michael knows that finding his brother won't erase the past, but it may be the first step toward building a future where the weight he has carried can at last be left behind.